The sound of her voice carried on the wind like a hymn, silencing the raucous saloon crowd for one breathtaking moment before the laughter erupted. Lillian Dawson clutched the edge of her shawl tightly around her shoulders, tears welling in her eyes as she fled from the rusty nail saloon into the dusty streets of Cottonwood Springs, Colorado. The year was 1875, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her 19 years accepting a dare to sing before the Saturday night crowd. "Look at the songbird fly," someone called after her, followed by cruel laughter that seemed to chase her down the moonlit street. Lillian ran until her lungs burned, her copper-colored hair coming loose from its careful arrangement, tears streaming down her freckled cheeks. She had only been in town 3 days, arriving on the stagecoach with nothing but 2 valises and a letter of introduction to her aunt's friend, who needed help running the millinery shop. This was supposed to be her fresh start after her parents' deaths, not another humiliation. She slowed to a walk as she reached the edge of town, the night air cool against her heated face. The vast expanse of stars overhead made her feel small, insignificant. Back home in Missouri, she'd always sung to herself while doing chores or walking in the woods. Her mother had called it her gift from the angels, but tonight had proven what the girls at school had always said: her unusual voice was nothing to celebrate, lost in her thoughts. Lillian didn't notice the horse and rider approaching until they were nearly upon her. She startled and moved to the side of the road. "Evening, madam," came a deep, gentle voice. "You shouldn't be out walking alone this time of night." Lillian looked up to see a tall man atop a chestnut gelding. His face was half shadowed by his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in a few days' stubble. "I'm fine, thank you," she managed, her voice still raw from crying. He dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. In the moonlight, she could now see kind eyes studying her with concern. "You're the new girl at Clara's shop, aren't you?" "The milliner's assistant," Lillian nodded, wondering how he knew. "Name's Wade Tucker. I run the T-Bar T Ranch outside of town." He extended a gloved hand, which she hesitantly took. "Now, would you mind telling me why you're walking alone at night looking like someone just stole your last dollar?" There was something in his manner, direct but gentle, that made Lillian want to trust him. "I made a fool of myself at the saloon. Some ladies from the shop said I should come along for a social evening. When they found out I sing, they—" Her voice faltered. "They what?" he prompted, his expression darkening. "They dared me to sing for everyone, then they all laughed." She lifted her chin, trying to salvage what remained of her dignity. "I should have known better." Wade Tucker was silent for a long moment. "I was there," he finally said, "at the back of the room." Lillian's cheeks burned with fresh embarrassment. "Then you heard?" "I did." His voice had taken on a curious quality. "That voice is unlike anything I've ever heard, like a prayer carried on the wind." Lillian stared at him, certain he was mocking her. Her voice had always been unusual, not the clear, pretty soprano that was fashionable, but something deeper, with a rasp that cracked on certain notes. "You don't need to be kind, Mr. Tucker." "Wade," he corrected. "And I'm not being kind, I'm being honest." He took the reins of his horse in one hand. "Come on, I'll walk you back to Mrs. Harding's boarding house." "That is where you're staying, isn't it?" Lillian nodded, surprised again that he knew this detail. As they walked side by side through the quiet streets, the horses' hooves making soft sounds in the dirt, she felt her humiliation begin to ebb. "My mother was Cherokee," Wade said unexpectedly. "She used to sing in a way that sounded nothing like the church hymns or popular songs. When she sang, it was like she was calling to something beyond this world." He glanced at Lillian. "Your voice reminded me of that. Is your mother—" Lillian began, noting his use of past tense. "She passed when I was 15. Fever took her." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Lillian could hear the old pain beneath it. "I'm sorry. My parents died last winter. Influenza." They walked in companionable silence for a while, sharing the unspoken understanding of those who have known loss. "Those people at the saloon," Wade finally said as they approached the boarding house, They weren't laughing because your singing was bad. They were laughing because it was different, and people fear what's different. Lillian stopped at the gate to Mrs. Harding's neat yard. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Tucker Wade." "My pleasure, Miss Dawson." He tipped his hat. "Perhaps I'll see you in town again." "Perhaps," she said, though she couldn't imagine why a successful rancher would seek out the company of a milliner's assistant who couldn't even sing properly. As she climbed the steps to the boarding house, she heard him call out softly, "Don't stop singing, Lillian. Some of us are listening for the right reasons." The next morning, Lillian woke to the sound of Mrs. Harding knocking on her door. "Miss Dawson, there's someone asking for you downstairs. Says he has a delivery." Confused, Lillian quickly dressed and pinned her hair, wondering who would be sending her anything. When she descended the stairs, she found a young boy holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Are you Miss Lillian?" the boy asked. "I am. This is for you." "From Mr. Tucker." He thrust the package into her hands and darted away before she could respond. Lillian unwrapped the package to find a small book of poetry by Walt Whitman. Inside the cover was a folded note. "Miss Dawson, I am the poet of the body and I am the poet of the soul. Whitman understands that beauty comes in many forms, so does music." Wade Tucker. Lillian stared at the note, a warmth spreading through her chest. She tucked the book into her pocket, carrying it with her to the millinery shop where she spent the day learning to trim hats and make small talk with customers who pretended they hadn't been at the saloon the night before. 2 weeks passed. Lillian saw Wade Tucker 3 times, once riding past the shop, once at the general store where he tipped his hat to her, and once at church where he sat 3 pews behind her. Each time her heart quickened, but he made no further approach beyond a polite greeting. Then came the announcement of the town's Founders' Day celebration. There would be a picnic, games, and in the evening, musical performances in the town square. "You should sing," said Clara Thompson, the milliner and Lillian's employer, as they closed the shop one evening. Lillian nearly dropped the hat she was boxing. "After what happened at the saloon, I think not." Clara, a widow in her 40s with kind eyes and practical hands, shook her head. "That was different. The saloon crowd is rough, but Founders' Day is family entertainment. Besides," she added with a knowing look, "I hear Wade Tucker has been asking about you." Lillian felt her cheeks flush. "Has he, asked my husband if you were settling in all right, if you were happy here?" Clara smiled. "James says Wade's never shown interest in any of the local girls before. Not since he came back from the war and took over his daddy's ranch." "I'm sure he's just being neighborly," Lillian said, though her heart betrayed her with a hopeful flutter. "Well, neighborly or not, you should consider singing at Founders' Day. Show everyone what you can really do." The idea terrified Lillian, but a small part of her wondered if Wade would be there, if he truly had meant what he said about her voice. The day of the celebration arrived, clear and warm. Lillian wore her best dress, a sky blue cotton with white lace trim that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair. She helped Clara set up a display of summer bonnets, then wandered through the festivities, watching children play games and families spread blankets for picnicking. She was admiring a display of quilts when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Dawson." She turned to find Wade Tucker, hatless today, his dark hair combed neatly, wearing a clean shirt and vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. At 32, he was older than her by 13 years, but standing there in the sunlight, he looked younger than she'd first thought, especially when he smiled, as he was doing now. "Mr. Tucker," she replied, hoping he couldn't hear her heart pounding. "I was hoping I'd find you here." His eyes, she noticed, were the color of coffee with a splash of cream. "Are you enjoying the celebration?" "Very much. It's lovely to see everyone so happy." "I hear there's to be music later," he said. "Will you be performing?" Lillian shook her head quickly. "Oh, no. I don't think that would be wise." A slight frown crossed his face. "Because of what happened at the saloon, partly," she admitted. "But also because I've never performed properly before. I just sing to myself mostly." Wade looked like he wanted to say more, but they were interrupted by the mayor calling everyone to gather for the opening ceremony. Throughout the afternoon, Lillian found herself repeatedly in Wade's company. He bought her lemonade, walked with her through the displays of crafts, and introduced her to his foreman and ranch hands when they crossed paths. By sunset, when the musical performances were set to begin, Lillian found herself sitting beside Wade on a bench near the makeshift stage. One by one, townspeople performed. An old man played the fiddle, a young girl recited a poem, the blacksmith and his wife sang a duet. Then the mayor stood up. "We have time for one more performance before the fireworks. Anyone else care to share their talents?" There was a moment of silence. Lillian felt Wade's eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed firmly on her hands. "I'd like to nominate Miss Lillian Dawson," came a woman's voice. Lillian's head snapped up to see Clara standing a few feet away. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked curious, others skeptical. Lillian felt her face grow hot. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Wade said softly. "That voice is too beautiful to keep silent." Somehow she found herself moving toward the stage, her legs shaky, her throat tight. The faces before her blurred except for one, Wade, watching her with such earnest hope that she felt something unlock inside her. "What will you be singing, dear?" the mayor asked. "Amazing Grace," she replied, the only song she could think of in that moment. There was no accompaniment, just Lillian standing alone as the sun dipped below the horizon. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice started soft, almost hesitant, but grew stronger with each phrase. It wasn't a conventionally beautiful voice. It had a smoky quality, dipping into unexpected places, sometimes breaking on the higher notes before finding its power again. It was raw, honest, and completely unique. When she finished, there was silence. Lillian opened her eyes, terrified of what she might see. But instead of laughter, she found wonder on the faces before her. Then Wade stood up and began to applaud, and others joined him until the whole square echoed with appreciation. Afterwards, as the first fireworks exploded overhead, Wade found her at the edge of the crowd. "That," he said, "was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "It was the most frightening thing I've ever done," she confessed. "May I call on you properly, Miss Dawson? Tomorrow afternoon, perhaps?" The question took her by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." The following day, Wade arrived at Mrs. Harding's boarding house with his horse and a smaller, gentler mare. "I thought we might ride out to the creek," he explained. "If you're comfortable on horseback." Lillian, who had grown up riding her father's old plow horse, assured him she was. The day was perfect for riding, not too hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. They followed a trail out of town, through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of aspen and pine. "How did you end up in Cottonwood Springs?" Lillian asked as they rode side by side. "My father claimed this land before the war, built the ranch from nothing." Pride colored his voice. "When I came back from fighting, he was ailing. I took over more and more until he passed 3 years ago." "You fought in the war." Lillian hadn't considered this, though it explained the gravity she sometimes saw in his eyes. Wade nodded. 4 years with the Union cavalry. "Came home different like most men did." "Is that why?" She hesitated. "Why I'm 32 and unmarried," he smiled slightly. "Partly never seemed to find the right person, or maybe I wasn't looking." His eyes met hers. "Until recently." They reached the creek, a clear stream running between cottonwood trees that gave the town its name. Wade helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They spread a blanket in the shade and shared the lunch. Wade had packed fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, and coffee from a tin flask. "Tell me about your family," Wade said as they ate. Lillian told him about growing up the only child of a schoolteacher father and a mother who took in sewing. How they'd encouraged her love of books. How lonely the house had been after the influenza took them both within days of each other. "The last thing my mother said to me," Lillian recalled, "was 'Sing me to sleep, Lily. I sang until her breathing stopped. She looked down, surprised to find tears on her cheeks. Wade reached across the blanket and took her hand. His palm was calloused, but his touch was gentle. "That was a gift you gave her," he said. "Just as your singing last night was a gift to everyone there, even though it's strange." "Not pretty like it should be," Wade's brow furrowed. "Who told you singing should only sound one way?" "Everyone. The music teacher at school, the girls in the choir." "Well, they're wrong." His conviction was so strong that Lillian couldn't help but believe him. "Your voice is like the land out here, wild and true and full of soul." No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever really seen her the way Wade seemed to. They spent the afternoon by the creek, talking about books. He was more well-read than she'd expected for a rancher. Their hopes: she wanted to eventually open her own shop. He was experimenting with breeding stronger cattle, and their shared love of open spaces. As the sun began to lower, they reluctantly packed up to return to town. Before mounting their horses, Wade took both her hands in his. "Lillian," he said her name like it was something precious. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life. Would you allow me to continue calling on you?" "Yes," she said, her heart soaring. "I'd like that very much." Over the next 3 months, Wade courted Lillian properly. He took her riding, brought her wildflowers, escorted her to church socials, and introduced her to his sprawling ranch. She met his workers, a mix of white, Mexican, and Native American men who clearly respected their boss. She saw how he treated everyone fairly, spoke softly, but stood firm in his convictions. Through Wade's encouragement, Lillian began to sing more openly. She joined the church choir, though her unconventional voice sometimes raised eyebrows. She sang at social gatherings when asked, and always, Wade watched her with that look of wonder, as if he were hearing something no one else could. In return, Lillian brought softness back into Wade's life. The ranch house, which had been functional but sparse since his mother's death, slowly acquired feminine touches: curtains she sewed, wildflowers in jars, books of poetry on the table. Their courtship was not without challenges. Some in town whispered that Lillian was too young for Wade, or that she was setting her sights too high by courting the owner of the largest ranch in the county. Others still mocked her singing, though less openly now that she was under Wade's protection, and protection she sometimes needed. One evening in late summer, Wade took Lillian to a dance at the town hall. As they waltzed together, Lillian aware of nothing but the warmth of his hand at her waist and the tenderness in his eyes, a voice cut through the music. "Hey, Tucker. Does she still make that caterwauling noise when you kiss her?" It was Hank Dobbs, the saloon owner's son, drunk and belligerent. Wade stiffened, but Lillian placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It's not worth it." But Wade gently removed her hand and turned to face Hank. The music stopped as everyone watched. "You owe the lady an apology, Dobbs," Wade said, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Hank sneered. "For telling the truth? Everyone knows her singing sounds like a dying calf." Wade moved so quickly that Lillian barely saw it happen. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Hank by the collar, lifting the smaller man nearly off his feet. "Apologize," Wade repeated, "or we'll step outside and I'll teach you some manners." "Wade, please," Lillian said, touching his shoulder. She could feel the tension in his muscles. "Let him go." For a moment she thought he wouldn't listen. Then slowly Wade lowered Hank back to the floor. "You're not worth the trouble," he told Hank. "But if I ever hear you disrespect Miss Dawson again, there won't be a second warning." He turned to Lillian, offering his arm. "Would you like to go home?" She nodded, acutely aware of the stares following them as they left the hall. Outside in the cool evening air, Wade ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "You were defending me," Lillian said, touched by his protectiveness even as she worried about the consequences. "No man should speak to a woman that way," Wade said firmly, "especially not to you." He took both her hands in his. "Lillian, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped a beat at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" The The first time I heard you sing at the saloon, I was at the back of the room because I'd just finished a cattle deal. I wasn't planning to stay, but then your voice." He paused, searching for words. It stopped me in my tracks. It was like hearing my mother again, hearing something real and true in a world full of falseness. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "When they laughed at you," Wade continued, "I wanted to stand up right then and tell them all they were fools. But by the time I pushed through the crowd, you were gone." His hands tightened around hers. "I followed you that night because I couldn't bear the thought that you might stop singing because of their cruelty." "Wade, let me finish," he said gently. "Every day since then, I've fallen more in love with you. Your courage, your kindness, the way you've brought music back into my life." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. "I had planned to do this differently, but after tonight." He withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it, if you would become my wife." Lillian stared at the ring, then at Wade's earnest face illuminated by the moonlight. In that moment, all her doubts vanished. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Wade, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. When he kissed her, there in the moonlight outside the town hall, with music still faintly audible from inside, she felt like singing and for the first time in her life, was not afraid to let her voice be heard. They were married that October as the aspen trees turned gold against the blue Colorado sky. The ceremony took place at the T-Bar T Ranch, with Clara as Lillian's matron of honor and Wade's foreman as his best man. The entire town turned out, even those who had once mocked Lillian's singing. People brought food, flowers, and well wishes. Someone produced a fiddle, another a guitar, and there was dancing until sunset. During the celebration, Wade led Lillian away from the crowd to the edge of the ranch house porch. The mountains rose in the distance, painted rose and purple by the setting sun. "Are you happy, Mrs. Tucker?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Would you sing for me, just for me?" Lillian smiled and began to sing softly, a love song her mother had taught her long ago. Her unique voice, smoky and rich, carried across the yard. Gradually, the party quieted as people turned to listen. When she finished, there was a moment of reverent silence before the applause began. Wade's eyes shone with pride and love. "That voice," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "is my prayer answered." In the years that followed, Lillian and Wade built a life together at the T-Bar T Ranch. The following spring brought their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Wade's mother. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William. The ranch prospered under Wade's careful management, and Lillian started a small millinery business from home, creating hats that became sought after throughout the county. Through it all, Lillian sang. She sang lullabies to her children, hymns at church, and work songs while tending her garden. She sang at community gatherings, her unusual voice now recognized and appreciated for its distinctive quality. She even taught singing to interested children in town, encouraging those with unconventional voices to embrace their unique sound. 5 years after their wedding, Wade built Lillian a small gazebo near the creek where they had picnicked during their courtship. It was painted white, with climbing roses planted around it. "Your singing place," he told her, leading her to it blindfolded on her 24th birthday. "Somewhere your voice can soar free whenever you wish." Lillian christened the gazebo by singing the same hymn she had performed at Founder's Day, the song that had first shown her the power of her voice. Wade listened with the same rapt attention he'd shown that day, his love only deepened by the years they'd spent together. "That voice," he said when she finished, taking her in his arms, "will always be my prayer." By their 10th anniversary, Lillian had published a small book of songs compositions that embraced, rather than disguised, the qualities that made her singing distinctive. The book found its way to Denver, then to other Western towns, bringing letters from women and men who had always been told their voices weren't proper, but who found validation in Lillian's work. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Wade took Lillian's hand, his thumb brushing over the simple pearl ring she still wore. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming to Cottonwood Springs. Marrying a rough rancher instead of going to Denver, or even back east where your singing might have found a bigger audience." Lillian looked at her husband, his face weathered now from years working outdoors, lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun and from laughter. She saw the man who had heard beauty where others heard only strangeness, who had given her the courage to claim her voice as her own. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "Everything I need is right here." She squeezed his hand. "Everything I am became possible because of you, because you listened when no one else would." That night, as they had done countless times over the years, Lillian sang Wade to sleep, her voice unique and true, offering comfort and love in the darkness. And as always, he drifted off with a smile, hearing in her unusual tones the answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was making until the night he first heard her sing.